My friends, I just came in receipt of a broadcast email message authored by Paul Bradley, dated Tuesday, April 25th, 2023. In Bradley's email message, he includes a link to a document authored by Ron Thomas entitled Supplemental Drainage Memo, dated April 24, 2023. Now, after reading this document, I felt it a bit over my head to address point by point. So I called Bill Graves at 135 Evergreen Street. Bill Graves is an environmental consultant who practices in Northern Virginia, and I felt he was far more qualified to understand this subject matter than I. I would like to play for you the full interview with Bill Graves as we go through Ron Thomas's memo point by point. Just recap or repeat what you told me yesterday as far as your background. I understand you're an environmental engineer working primarily.
I'm not an engineer, an environmental consulting person. That's my specialty, and I do compliance work with a large facility. So I understand. I do a lot of work with facilities and regulatory requirements and what have you.
Now,
I'm not technically an engineer. I'm technically a chemist.
Are you familiar with this area about drainage and drainage engineering, water retention, that sort? Do you have any kind of tertiary knowledge of it?
I deal with so much stormwater stuff and the regulations and the requirements. I mean, I'm reasonably familiar with most any stormwater issue.
Okay. Well, let's go on. Let's review his letter and just talk about point by point. So he says, I'm going to skip down to the second paragraph. He says, six principal pieces of misinformation are being circulated around the community. It is critical that the correct information is provided to you. And so the first point is 1. The amount spent thus far to complete Bridge and Bayberry Road is approximately $155,000. The board has been transparent in timely. I think the grammatica is wrong here. The board has been transparent and timely providing this information to the community. It is important to note that $75,000 spent on Bridge Road was sourced from the funds in the 2021-2022 budget that became available because of a significant increase in volunteer work in the community throughout fiscal year end 2022. In other words, the funds used to complete the ditch and culvert work on Bridge Road was included in the assessment paid in June of 2021 for maintenance related to community property. Post-March 2022, $80,000 was budgeted and spent in fiscal year end 2023 to complete Bayberry Road. The proposed fiscal year end 2024 budget includes $195,000 to complete the additional road. I think he means Addy. The additional road would be Addy is what he's getting at. Such that the amount spent per household since March of 2022 would be approximately $675 per household. Well, okay, that's his first point. So he's basically saying there's been a misconception about the monies budgeted and the monies that have been spent thus far. I remember somebody had a takeaway from a board meeting when they approved the budget that this phase of the budget was $120,000. And that was, I think, sourced from the minutes. So whether it's $95,000, which I seem to remember Jerry Kafka throwing out that number as that was the number relating to the contract work. Not necessarily the materials, but just the contract work. Does that jive with what you remember?
I can't speak to any of the finances and stuff that I really don't know how the community has approached the financing of this within the budget.
Okay, so let's go on to point 2. because, you know, the financing really aren't as important. Quite frankly, whether it's 95,000 or 120,000, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of
Right.
money to be spent on a project that has bared little fruit thus far from the feedback that we've gotten from the community. Would you agree?
Once again, the community has a requirement to maintain those drainage ditches to the extent that they were set up. So I would fully expect if the community to spend money maintaining them. As to whether what they spent is reasonable or not depends on what the standard is and all that stuff. And that's really the concept here is I don't think that we have a standard. I don't know. We should have had this should have been a reserve item a long time ago to deal with these ditches, and I don't know what they're doing and how they budgeted, and it's impossible for me to evaluate whether that's a good amount of money or not. It's not cheap work.
No,
I know that.
it's not insignificant. And I don't think anyone's in the belief that we should not maintain culverts and we should not maintain ditches. And I think your point yesterday was there has to be a level set plan originally, and that when sedimentary sand fills in the existing ditches, that needs to be restored back to plan or back to a baseline.
Back to a site plan, which was unlikely approved, and if there is no existing site plan because of the time, that an engineer should create what needs to be done to meet the intent of the drainage ditches that are there. And that's the key concept there, is that these drainage ditches do have to be maintained.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so what they have an engineering firm. We haven't gotten that far in the letter yet, but I seem to remember they have an engineering firm, but the firm that does the baseline plan, wouldn't that be separate from the firm that does the actual work to avoid conflict of interest?
Well, I don't know what it looks like they have to me is the way that they went in and had a contractor suggest a scope of work, and they did it. They don't have an engineering. To the extent that I can tell, they don't have an engineering plan they're building this to. The contractor has made a determination that he has 12 to 18 inches of fall between the two places, and he's in theory establishing that 12 to 18 inches throughout that length of that road. And what does that say for the minimum slope in a trench and all that stuff? I really don't know that. I think the minimum slope you can have and move water is a 0.5% underneath the Delaware State stuff. And I don't know whether 18 inches divided by the length of that street is a slope of greater than or less than a 0.5%. I mean, that's what an engineering plan would tell you.
Right. Okay, well, let's continue with the letter, because maybe this will be revealed in his letter. And I've skimmed this. I haven't read it comprehensively as I'm doing right now. So point number 2, as many of you know, the board has contracted with Jeremy Hager to help us maintain our tree canopy. Jeremy is a certified master arborist. The board intends to have Jeremy work on our drainage with our drainage contractor to reassess the trees marked for removal on Addy Road. Jeremy will work with Lyndon Hitchin to ensure that the impact of any future work will have as minimal an impact on our tree canopy as possible. The board is also working with Denarec and DelDOT on drainage issues to the west of MBA. Well, that would mean Kent Avenue. Any final decision about which next road will be done will be made in consultation with these professionals. Now, this seems to address the concern about trees and the so-called 50 trees. I think Holly Flutie Dempsey brought up in the meeting on Thursday, March 23rd, that she had concerns about trees being uprooted to be able to deal with this drainage ditch project. Do you want to make comment of this, or can we just move on?
Technically, drainage ditches are to be kept free of, and I don't know that I agree with this, but the basic standard that you're going to find in the state standard is that drainage ditches are to be kept free of, trees and growth and stuff like that, so water can move through them.
Right.
Technically, the trees have grown there because no one's done anything about them. They technically, from a state standard, shouldn't be there. Quite
Right.
frankly.
So it would make sense when they were seedlings to have removed them right away. That would have been the prudent
Correct.
thing to do because they're small then. Now that they're big,
Well, that's not even the prudent thing. That's what's expected in the standard.
so they should have never been allowed to have grown from seedlings to full mature trees to begin with if they're interfering with the baseline plan of the drainage ditch,
Right.
right?
Side to side on the ditch is supposed to be maintained in a way without vegetative growth for the free flow of water. Once again, I'm not sure that from an environmental perspective, I agree that's necessarily the best way to do it, but that's what the state standard says as best as I can tell you.
Okay, let's go to point 3. We are reaching out to engineering firms with experience in drainage to get proposals for consideration, including the firm used by Bethany Beach. This must be Lindsay, is who he's talking about. I understand Bethany.
Lindsay's the contractor. They're talking about, I think, a separate engineering firm. An
Right.
engineering firm that does this type of work, which is what they should have done to start with. They're 3 rows into it. Why are they reaching out to an engineer now? Because they're getting all this flack, and they realize they've kind of fucked up a few things, and they don't have an engineering plan. And they're the board.
And yes, they've started this project with, it seems like, without a baseline plan or knowledge of the original plan that may or may not have existed decades ago. So they're trying to catch up. And so they're reaching out. Okay, it goes on. I understand Bethany no longer has engineering consults related to LH's ditch work. I guess that he means Lindsay. Because it was very expensive and confirmed the work being done. Again, there's grammatical issues with this sentence. Once proposals are received, the board will determine appropriate next steps based on the need and expense. The community will be immediately informed as pertinent information is received and decisions are made. Let me go on to point 4. I am unaware of the existence of consultations with experts completed by the previous boards decades ago. Well, maybe they should have asked. This information has not been provided.
Boards like this can't keep information because there's no common storage server that they, like a business that they serve.
Well,
there's no office or anything. So I mean, I'm sure they've lost all the historical documentation they've ever had. That's not uncommon.
I would think if it was ever produced, it would be in paper. It wouldn't be on a server as a Word document, but it would be on paper somewhere.
As boards change, I mean, my dad used to be big into this stuff, and who knows? I mean, we may have had stuff in our house at some point. I can't begin to tell you. But boards, I mean, trying to keep this information through the change of boards in time, because you're talking about information that was generated 15 years ago, potentially another generation.
Right.
So it's very difficult to keep that information at this level, although they're supposed to. The reality is that the first starting point is how this thing was put in. I mean, is there a design for how this was put in? And if not, then you create it. If there is, then you follow it.
Right. Now, the only people that I could see conceivably asking about this would be living members of boards decades ago, meaning Reardon and Dempsey and those type of people. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, they may know. I don't know. I mean, I don't know where, but the reality is that they're doing a significant amount of work. There should be some sort of specifications that they're working into, and if you just simply say, okay, let's default to the Sussex County and the Delaware standards, then the work they're doing doesn't meet the Delaware sediment erosion control documents as best as I can tell, as I see them. And I'm not saying it's bad work. I'm just saying they're going in and I don't believe there's any provisions for a V trench, and some of the places they put in a V trench, they've decided to save some trees, and I mean, technically they shouldn't be saving trees. Now, do we want to save trees is a whole other issue, but I mean, This
Well,
is the way
yeah.
large standard cuts.
If your priority is to keep the canopy of trees, then you just don't have a ditch project at all, right? I
Well,
mean, there's nowhere to put it,
You could make that argument. I mean,
right?
the state to put the ditch, to build a state standard ditch, it's going to move water. I believe is going to require a 2-foot bottom with a slope on either side of a certain angle. And I think if you go look at our property, you'll see that's exactly what we have on our property.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So,
Bill,
but I mean, that is the standard, and the work that they're doing, they've left some pretty big trees in the drainage ditch and worked around them. And
Yeah.
I love trees. But technically, if you're opening up that drainage ditch and you're trying to get it to flow right, you're opening it up to the specifications that are engineered.
and those trees,
Otherwise, you're somewhat wasting your time.
and the size of those trees, they're not inexpensive to remove. I mean, those trees are quite large.
And maybe people don't want. Maybe the community doesn't want them removed. I mean, that's all part of it.
Yeah. Well, then you have to come up to priorities. What's important to you in a community?
You do, but the board should be basing all these decisions off of an engineered plan as opposed to, I'm going to get a contractor in and ask him what to do. I mean, it is expensive. It's expensive to hire an engineer. It is.
Yes.
But you hire engineers for a reason, and you hire them in theory to, one, they can produce a scope that's competitively biddable between multiple parties, and two, they can direct you to contractors that are capable of doing the work instead of saying, "There's nobody else." We talked to Southside. There's nobody else who can do this work. We're going to hire this guy. I mean, engineers will give you 3 people that will bid it. They'll go out and get bids for you because they know the business.
Yeah. Well, let's
don't know the business.
Well, let's touch on that in a little while about the fact that there seems to only be one contractor available to do the work. I'll just continue with his point 4. The only report or assessment we are aware of was written by Carl Swanson, February of 2001. Carl was the chairman of the MBA Drainage Committee. While Carl is not a drainage expert, I believe there is nobody in the community that knows more about this subject matter than he. According to Carl, quote, even if this is Carl, these are Carl's words, even if the drainage from Middlesex is not improved, we can improve the appearance of the community and reduce the amount of standing water in the ditches. Establish a uniform grade for all ditches within Middlesex Beach from Beach Plum to the end of Middlesex rights of way. This work would include some minor ditching, filling in of ditches at appropriate locations, and raising and lowering some of the culverts on individual driveways. End quote. Then Ron says, the work Carl has recommended MBA complete was not adequately addressed by previous boards in the intervening 20 years. The work completed by LH on Bridge and Bayberry Road is 100% compliant with those recommendations. Okay, he goes on. This is still point 4 in another paragraph. Arranging culverts in a, quote, progressively downhill arrangement, end quote, without completing any work to the intervening ditches would render the culvert work to be a waste of money. This is because most of our culverts are particularly or completely below the surface of the ditches that lie between them. Many other areas on the Pine side have ditches that are 12 to 18 inches lower than the culverts, and many of these culverts are collapsed, rusted, or otherwise blocking any flow of water. This collectively results in the culverts being useless, parentheses, regardless of how well they are installed or kept clear of debris, end parenthesis. New paragraph. I am aware of only one instance of written documentation stating ditch digging in Middlesex Beach would be a waste of money. This wording is included in a memo prepared by Jeff Sella several years ago. Like Carl, Jeff has put in countless hours researching this issue and providing his findings to the community. Well, as personal note is, Jeff is dead set against this work going forward in the manner it's being done. I'll continue. I know personally how much work this entails, and I thank him for his efforts. Jeff provided the following memo to Margie Sear and myself on May 22nd, 2021. So now he quotes Jeff Sella. Quote, RPM, or Right Property Management, also talked with several surveyors. All stated that we are wasting money and time trying to fix our ditches. I then talked to Greg Hook, who visited Middlesex and did a drive-by of our ditches. He said that to prepare a complete and accurate vertical and horizontal survey would cost $20,000 to $30,000 and would be a complete waste of money at this time. Is Greg Hook with Simpler Surveying? I don't know
Greg Hook, but I mean,
I think he's with. Sorry, I think.
It wouldn't surprise me if a survey cost $20,000 to get
Yeah.
all that said. And you know, at the end of the day, you know, none of these people are really qualified to tell us whether, you know, that stuff. It is really, when you come to drainage, and this is one of those drainage systems where it really it's got to be, you decide what you want out of it, and the legal requirement is to maintain it as per plan.
Right.
There isn't a lot of other legal requirements.
Okay, well, let me continue with this quote of Jeff Sella's writings in his memo. So he said, in addition, he's talking about Greg Hook. I think he's from Simpler Surveying. He said that could not even begin. He said that could not even begin the project until Sussex County cleared the ditches along Kent Avenue. He indicated that the ditches along Kent are too filled in with debris to permit overflow, and they may even run uphill. Parentheses, I know of at least one section that does not run uphill. End parentheses. He indicated that until the county corrects their problem along Kent, we would be wasting money to do anything about our ditches. New paragraph. This is still Jeff. He suggested that we have all of our ditches cleaned of all debris and that all underground culverts also be cleaned for an unobstructed flow of water. He noted that many of our outflow culverts were clogged and partially clogged. We then retained McCabe, I think that's a landscaping firm, to periodically clean out the ditches and culverts. On a long-term basis, he indicated that we must have realistic expectations on what the ditches can and cannot do. Our area is a swamp with a very high water table. Ditches will not solve that problem. New paragraph. His project outline would be, bullet point, have Sussex County clean the ditches and outflow pipes along Kent Avenue. Point 2. Have Sussex County ensure that all ditches along Kent have the proper outflow. Point 3. Have a complete survey, vertical and horizontal, of all our ditches and the Kent Avenue ditches completed. Point 4. Hire an expert ditch company to realign all of our ditches, including the possible replacement of some or all culverts, and a reduction in the amount of culverts within Middlesex. Okay, now this paragraph is back to Ron Thomas.
What he's saying is exactly the correct engineering approach. It is exactly the correct engineering approach. We've got a 2001 document where it's recommended that we get Kent to clean them out. Has Kent cleaned them out since 20? If Kent hasn't cleaned them out in 21 years, why does the board think they're going to get them cleaned out in the next 2?
Yes. Yeah, that's another point.
You know, I mean, that's just the people do not maintain this stuff. It's just that's the general. People do not maintain them. Counties don't maintain them. It's just they don't do it.
I'll go on with Thomas's letter. It's still in his bullet point 4. It is important to note Sussex County is not involved in any way in the proposed work to our west, nor have they ever been. Greg Hook is the owner of Simpler Survey. There it is. A well-respected surveying company. It is not an excavating company. The board has made best efforts to validate all important statements that we received that are attributed to someone else. This is why I'm following up with Brent Warner on the statements Lyndon Hitchens has made regarding engineering studies. Okay, Lyndon Hitchens is the
excavating company, I guess, that's doing the ditches.
Right. Yep.
Okay, likewise, Paul Bradley has spoken with Greg Hook for the same reason. Greg informed Paul that he has no recollection of visiting Middlesex Beach and opining on the condition of our ditches or advisability of completing ditch or culvert work. He also stated his office was not contacted with a request to visit Middlesex Beach. I am unaware of any validated conversation or written correspondence with drainage ditch experts. Therefore, I'm unable to respond directly to the notion that a drainage infrastructure rebuild within the Pine site is a waste of money. See, that's the end of his paragraph. This totally contradicts what Sella said. From 2001. Right?
You can't tell anything if they don't have a written they don't have written specs that you're building to. They don't have anything that shows what the final elevations, what the expected life expectancy of the project is. When are we going to have to go back and do this again?
Okay.
So, all that information you could, and once again, if you went out and said, okay, this is the original volume of the ditch, this is the restored volume of the ditch, this is how much sediment we took out, and we put it right back. And we put it back to the way it's supposed to be. The standard engineering process there is, okay, we took out 150 tons of dirt, over 1,000 linear feet.
Yeah.
We basically took out this many, and that relates to this much of a buildup, and you're going to put a plan in place that if you have that buildup back again, you're going to go get it and fix it. I mean, it's not just, this isn't a one-time fix deal, like you go spend $95,000 and it's done. You have to maintain the ditches to the level that the engineering plan says they should be maintained to, and that means you're going in every 3 to 5 years and doing something.
Right. So you would, like any project, you start with a plan, you execute, and you measure to that plan where you're off, and then budget projects to bring the drainage ditches back to plan, which it doesn't seem like they're doing. I'll continue this point 4 that Thomas is refuting Greg Hook and Sella's recount of events. So he says, Jeff Sella has met with Lyndon Hitchens in 2017 to discuss the possibility of drainage work on the south side of Bayberry Road. Jeff stated in his drainage memo that Lyndon, quote, strongly suggested that we bury the ditches for better performance, end quote. Lyndon has more recently stated to me that his recollection of that conversation is different. Lyndon informed me he stated that burying the ditches, ergo by using pipes, was not advisable. He stated this is because doing so does not permit evaporation or sinking of water into the ground below. Utilization of 12-inch pipes also invites frequent clogging and significant ongoing expense associated with unclogging them. This is the exact recommendation made to us by Denarec. So this is end of point 4 by Thomas. Now, what I see here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is he is relying on Lyndon's words. Lyndon is the contractor on record. Lyndon would have a conflict of interest, would he not?
Well, Lyndon would have a conflict of interest, but he doesn't, because he's just telling you what he thinks, I mean, and you're going to do his stuff. Once again, somebody says A, somebody says B. This is where an engineering plan settles it. I mean, it's that having these hearsay conversations and describing them in emails is a lot of people think that's acceptable, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, the person who's held responsible is the stamp of a professional engineer. So that is the person that's ultimately financially held liable if something screws up. And both of those parties are saying could be right under certain circumstances, depending on how you review it, but from the standpoint of what's the state going to say if they come into it, I think they're going to say what Lyndon said, is that the ditches have to be maintained and kept open, and that they shouldn't be put into pipes. That would be my expectation.
So whether you
shouldn't be put into pipes.
Whether you use pipes or not, that would be part of that plan. But Linden's role in this is just maintain according to the plan. Correct?
Lyndon's role is to execute the scope of work that the board signs with him.
Right.
That's his role.
So he
You know,
should be
he's a
the
business.
he should be the tail, and not the dog wagging the tail.
Right, but very often, because of the lack of funds and expertise and not one hired engineer, the contractor becomes both the dog and the tail, and that's what we have here.
Right.
Okay, so I'll go on to point 5 of Thomas's memo. The written reference to Bridge Road being a, quote, test, end quote, project was made in January 2023 board meeting minutes. The use of this word was attributed to related statements I made in that meeting and was misrepresented in the minutes. I have always been consistent and transparent with the community regarding the statements I've made and the work being performed. As the project manager, please know none of the drainage infrastructure rebuild was undertaken as a test. He goes on. Lyndon Hitchens was a qualified expert. Jeff Sella acknowledged.
He's not. Give me a definition of a qualified expert. That he's not. Does he design and basically stamp and get approved for plans, for site plans? Does he do that work? I mean, depending on your definition of qualified expert, there. I mean, he's an expert. He's certainly an expert in digging and doing the work. But
Right.
is he an expert in engineering the design? I don't think his credentials. I don't know his credentials, but if they don't have an engineering person on staff, he's not going to put his name on a plan and put it, because he basically be sued to shit. He'll tell you he knows what he's doing all day long, but he's not going to put it on a plan and put it on paper, and that's what engineers do.
So Ron Thomas could be exaggerating Lyndon Hitchens' qualifications here.
Well, you know, once again, Lyndon feels he's an expert in drainage ditches, I'm sure. But if you ask him if he's capable and legally, you know, is the person to design and create the design, he'd go, no, we just know what engineers are going to say, so we go in and do it. And I'm perfectly fine with that. It happens all the time. But at the end of the day, you know, he's not an engineer. He's not a professional with insurance. Ask him for his errors and omissions assurance. The insurance that he would have to do this, to do the design, would be professional errors and omissions. And if he has that, then he could be a professional. What
Right.
he's probably got is contractor's liability.
Right. So this
Contractors are done, and he's going to basically default right back to his proposal and say, I gave you a proposal, written proposal to do this, which probably does not reference standards or specifications in it. It says, I'm going to go in and open the ditches up, set the culverts at an elevation so they go this to that, but he's not going to speak to any of the state standards that he's you know, basically following.
Right. So it sounds like there's a hole here.
Well, there's a hole throughout the whole thing. I mean, that's so the whole thing is but you know, but I mean, as much as I say that, I mean, I really am. I don't think that the project is a bad project per se. You know, but I think they're being awfully heavy-handed on a number of topics, and you know, if you're going to be heavy-handed, you better damn well have your ducks behind you, and they don't.
Right. So they're moving ahead with a project really without it sounds like there's just no definitive plan to start with.
They're moving ahead with
A patchwork.
capital project. They're moving ahead with a capital infrastructure project without a design drawings or written drawings or written specifications, and it's a high dollar one. It's the most significant one that we have, and they're moving forward without any sort of a design drawing or standard. I mean, if you're going to do that, you best be a little bit accommodating and start to listen to people, because people will start to throw darts back. And, you know, I mean, basically, I have no idea how they'd respond, but, you know, you can always reach out and say, I'd like the director's liability insurance policy, and you can contact insurance and say, I think your directors are insured by you. are making engineering decisions outside their scope of work and outside their expertise, and subsequently are exposing you to liability if we sue.
Well,
Because
yeah.
those are the people that are if the directors fuck up, their errors in alliance, there's error. Their directors' liability insurance is the people that are going to pick it up, and board members have to be real careful to not step outside and make engineering structural decisions in the event buildings fall or properties flood.
So he says Lyndon Hitchens is a qualified expert. Jeff Sella acknowledged Lyndon's expertise at a March 16 town hall meeting when he stated, quote, "You are correct. He," meaning Lyndon, is the ditch guy in Sussex County, and he has a great reputation, end quote. Then Thomas says, "Nobody I'm aware of has ever questioned Lyndon's knowledge, honesty, and character. He has worked in the drainage industry since he began working with his father at the age of 17. After digging tax ditches," I don't know what that means. After digging
A tax ditch is a regulated ditch in Delaware.
Okay.
Ditches in Delaware are actually regulated.
Okay.
Once you get to the level you're a tax ditch, then it is a regulated ditch. It gets done during a certain way. Ours are not regulated tax ditches.
Okay. So he says, after digging tax ditches for the Sussex Conservation District for 19 years, Lyndon now started his own business. The primary objective and quantifiable standard that can be used to measure the success of the work in MBA is the abatement of yard flooding after the work has been completed, and to observe water movement from east to west as it makes its way down the entire, quote, grade, end quote. Ergo, not being halted by improper or non-existent ditches or improperly installed or broken culvert and pipes. Now, in commenting about this, he seems to misquote. Well, he may be taking Jeff Sella's words out of context, meaning he's quoting Jeff Sella in a virtual town hall meeting or a town hall meeting on March 16th at some year. He doesn't quote the year. But what I'm getting at is, Jeff Sella might very well think very highly of Lyndon Hitchens as a ditch digger, but not necessarily as the engineering guy to put down the plan. And he's also not a survey.
Right. If he's working for Sussex County, he's basically, at the end of the day, he's working off of their plan.
Right. So
he's looked at a lot of plans. I'm sure he knows what he's doing, but he's going to prepare. His proposal is going to be likely prepared in a way that, he's not an engineer. He's executing some level of work that he's laid out, and he's not. If he's smart, he's not tied into any standard. If he's not an engineer. So it sounds like he is smart. So I suspect he's not tied into any real standard other than, we're going to go in and we're going to establish grade from one end to the other and do those things, which they're by and large what the standard requires, but the standard has some other stuff in it. I mean, the ditches have a certain design requirement, and it just doesn't look like they're, and then maybe the feeling is that that we'd be taking more property from people, there'd be more pissed off people and what have you, but that's if you're going to put a ditch in, put the ditch in, damn it.
Well,
if you're gonna fix a ditch, fix it to whatever it was, because some people may have filled in portions of their ditches.
It doesn't seem like Lyndon Hitchens, is aware of a plan, and it doesn't seem like they're even bothering a plan. Here's a very salient paragraph. I was reading ahead as you were speaking. It is important to note an engineering study has never been requested or obtained by previous boards. Your current board is now working with Denarec, DelDOT, Sussex Conservation District, and the most respected drainage expert in Sussex County to help form our decisions. So they're basically saying they're going ahead without a plan. They're going ahead without an engineering study, right?
Well, they are, and basically, have any of those people committed anything in writing?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if any of those people given us anything in writing to say this is how it should be done, when you say you're working with people, what have those people given us in writing that shows how or what this is to be done? Because everybody's verbal word is their verbal word. So those are all very well-respected people in the drainage business. They should all have some level, and in theory, all of them probably could prepare the written plan for this site, but none of them are giving us a written plan. The written plan is the Sussex County Sediment and Erosion Control Handbook. That is the written and drainage handbook. That is it. That's the written plan, and that's where it all comes back to, and they're not following that.
So they're not following. Is this?
Sussex County? If you go to Sussex County's guidance documents, what they're doing does not match with what Sussex County says in theory should be there.
So
Now maybe Sussex County's come out and said, "Well, you don't need to do that for here and here." Well, then give us that in writing.
So what I hear you're saying is they're not following a guideline set down by the county in their approach.
Which would be the people who they're citing as we're working with. The county has got the only thing that I'm aware of in terms of written guidelines that they can be following is the Sediment and Erosion Control Handbook that's been adopted statewide. All the counties work with it, and you know that if you're going to get something else, you're going to get an engineer's plan, because an engineer will override those guidances because he has better whatever knowledge and skill set and insurance. But if you're not going to do that, then you're follow the guidance. And you say you're working with them implies in some way that they've left what you're doing, and that what they're basically saying is what you're doing in concept as well, but it doesn't say the details of it are being done correctly, nor is any of that other stuff. So it's just the guy is basically taking an approach to this that he's trying to find his way through this without having to do what he needs to do, or should be doing if he's got a contentious issue. If London's going to do the work, then my understanding is that they're going to do it to some level of a specification. Well, what exactly is that specification?
I think it's absent, is what I think is going on.
That's right. So if it's absent, then how do you even hold a contractor to a standard if it's not even there?
Right.
London can do whatever the hell he wants to do, and then we sue him in court and back and forth, and it goes back to his proposal.
So it goes really to his.
In any of the structure that they're putting out there, but they're doing it the way homeowner boards have done it for a long time. I'm not disputing that at all.
Right, but it's basically the scope of work is set out in the proposal that Linden's providing, but it's not following a plan. It's not following an engineering plan.
Right, and when they put our conduit in, so basically the homeowner association put our conduit and replaced our conduit. Really nice of them, I thought. And at the end of the day, I have no idea whether they shot those grades and put the bottom of that pipe at what the bottom of that pipe should be. And if they didn't, then if they redo this project, they're going to say, well, we got to take it out and put it back again because it wasn't put in right the first time. Well, your contractors put it in. I mean, I had no involvement with that, but I'm just saying, if you're going to do this and try to get water moving over that shallow of a grade, you've got to be damn good on your elevations, and the elevations have to hold.
Yes, I understand. Let me continue here with this the end of this fifth point. After saying that, he says the timing of the work on the next road is in the fall of this year. So that's the fall of 2023. The board will have another 6 months to evaluate the Kent Avenue infrastructure and determine whether an engineering study is prudent. Wow, they're waiting. If we deem the completion of another road is to be unadvisable, the funds collected in the 2023-2024 assessment for this purpose will be directed to the Capital Reserve Fund to be used for future work in the community. This ensures funding exists for this work should we continue to believe it is necessary. Well, the people in the survey, hold on, Bill. The people in the survey, they responded 2-1 that they don't want the monies put in the capital reserve now. They just
Well,
don't.
that's exactly where it should be put, because we should have a capital reserve budget for the roads and everything, and where it should be put is, I mean, there should be money collected technically every year. We should be paying something in to cover the cost of future capital repairs that have to be made to roads, the beach, the
Right.
ditches, and the other stuff. I mean, that's what should be there. And apparently our community owns the pipe underneath the driveway, so yeah, they've got to have some level of money budgeted there every year
Okay.
to dig up and replace people's pipes, and they really should have been
Okay.
doing it on some sort of a rotating schedule.
But is it all? But Bill, is it all or nothing? Meaning you need 120,000 budgeted in capital reserve every year after year after year, with when you don't know the approach. You don't know.
There's a capital reserve. There's supposed to be a capital reserve study that delineates exactly what you need. The road, you put them on some course. This is the course. This is the expense. This is what engineers do. This is the expense of the road for the next 30 years.
I agree.
It's $3 million. So you're going to collect 100,000 every year and put it in capital reserve.
I agree with all that, and I say that exists for roads, but I don't believe that exists for the drainage ditch work.
It should exist for the drainage ditches, and it should estimate that we have 37 or 57 culverts, and they're going to cost $10,000 to remove and replace, and therefore you can assume that over the course of the life of that culvert pipe is 30 years or 20 years, and you're going to divide those
Right.
two, that one side or the other. You're going to keep that amount of money every year. That's
Right.
what should be being done.
But we don't. But because you don't have a plan and an estimate of all the work you need to do, that is. Look, the approach they're doing isn't working. I was just over at Three Bridge, and I met with Alvin Ross, and there was standing water in his ditch right in front of his yard. It wasn't moving. It wasn't moving to Kent. It was just sitting there. So obviously, they did Bridge Road, and obviously it's not working. So what I'm getting at is, until you have a plan, until you have a cost estimates of every stage of that plan, you have to, that's gonna tell you what you need to budget for capital reserve on a yearly basis. And until you have that, you're just stabbing at the dark, saying, well, we need 120,000 in capital reserve for this road. We don't know that, quite frankly.
That's quite frankly, and that's why Jeff said, I don't know whether it's a good value or that you don't know, because you don't have the overall guidance, the document that you need to understand that. And the board is just doing this in a way that they've chosen to do it, which they are legally allowed to do.
Yes.
They are legally allowed to spend that money. I mean, and there is there's a quasi-legal requirement for them to maintain those ditches. No question about it.
And you're right. If the community feels so inclined, they can vote in different people in the board come September of 2023. And even before that,
that's the way it all gets fixed.
yes, and even before that, there could be a special election called. We could have. I think it's within Decoya, and probably within our covenants, although I haven't reviewed them, but I have heard talk about a special election. If the members of the board are wildly out of sync with the community could order a special election to elect board members during the flight of their term. And
good luck on that, because it likely takes a very high majority of the residents, and you'll never get them all to agree.
Yeah, well, I would think it would be like 60% vote. And you're right. It took Dave Weeking 5 years to get 60% of the community to vote for the new covenants several years ago.
Right.
But I want to go on to point 6 of Thomas's letter. He says, Margie Sear and I received an email from Joe Craver, 28 Bridge. We received his permission to disseminate his comments. John stated, it's not Joe. It's John Craver of 28 Due. John stated, okay, this is John's words. For years, the previous MXB presidents response was exactly as stated in this email, because the water can't drain to Kent, then nothing should be done. However, the statement made by this group that the ditches channelize the water is exactly why the project should continue. It's obvious to me that the more we can spread the water out, the quicker it can evaporate or seep into the soil. I hope you can express the importance of this fact, backed up by an independent third-party opinion. Otherwise, the do-nothing mindset will prevail. With all that said, thank you for the Bridge Road work. Well, this didn't come from Alvin Ross and Chris Powers at 3 Bridge Road, I notice. And the reason I point that out is you may be moving water, but if you're moving water to the west and loading up 3 Bridge, is that really a solution?
Yeah, I mean, what you're keeping going. I mean, the salient point here is none of these people are qualified technically to put together, and everybody wants to have their opinion heard and think their opinion matters, and the reality is it doesn't.
Right. It's just
you vote for the board, and the board makes the decisions, and the board has a fiduciary requirement to act in a certain way. Period. And the board does have a requirement to maintain those ditches. There's no question in my mind on that.
Yeah, I agree.
So at the end of the day, if you're going to have a requirement to maintain it, and you're going to come out of this set with all these nice ditches, you best well have some sort of a maintenance schedule on them. And they're not doing any of that. They're going in and they're doing what they're doing, and I can make a great argument that this is a good thing in a number of ways, and I can make a good argument that it's not going to matter diddly shit.
Yes, I agree.
Because the water there infiltrates at a level that is the infiltration rate there is high enough that none of us, I don't care who you are, unless you got clay standing on top of that property, none of us are going to have really large pooling amounts of water on there. The sand's just too porous.
Well,
All
let me.
those are red herrings. I mean, this is all red herrings. Stop.
Yeah. And so we read the comment from John Craver, 28 Bridge. And, God bless him. He's part of the 10% on my survey that want to proceed with the drainage ditch work line item for $95,000 or whatever it happens to be. They're going to have them, and that's perfectly fair to put in people that support your vision.
Well, it's expected. I mean, that's what they're going to do.
Right. So Thomas continues after the quote from John Craver, 28 Dune. He writes, once the work is complete on each street, the intention is to hire landscapers to rake leaves, pine needles, and other organic debris from our ditches before it has the opportunity to compost and become soil. I worked on it myself and found it to be quite easy. Depending on community interest, we may be able to complete much of this work each year utilizing volunteer labor. In closing, it is important to note a community member stated during the March 16 town hall that standing water remains in the ditch adjacent to their home on Bridge Road throughout the year. He's referring to Chris Powers. This was now I know what he means by March 16. He means the virtual town hall meeting on Thursday, March 16, 2023. That includes his reference to Jeff Sella as well. Jeff was not a board member at that time. Okay, so he's referring to Chris Powers, and he writes, this was in response to my statement that storm water is stored in our ditches seasonally, typically from mid-December to mid-April. During this time, mosquito larvae are inactive. Water in our ditches during the other 8 months of the year is a short-term occurrence. This is an important distinction because there is no overlap between standing water in our ditches and the mosquito season in Delaware. The mid-Atlantic states are in a, quote, zone 4. In this zone, mosquito season starts in late April and ends by mid-September. During this period, MBA does not typically have standing water in our ditches. And that's
Well, the reason we don't have standing water in our ditches is because ultimately water tables rise in the winter. So when you see the ditch, when you see water in the ditch, it means the water table's up. Water tables rise in the winter when the plants and the trees are not taking up the water, and they typically fall in the summer. But wet periods are going to be wet periods, whether they come in summer or fall. But that's the science behind what he doesn't really understand.